Well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this very special weekend edition of Australian Indian Radio, a live broadcast brought to you via Chantex Multimedia streaming services. Well, today, 15th of October, well, halfway through the month already, and a beautiful, beautiful, glorious day here in Brisbane. So 23 degrees and sunny. So it's looking very good for the Benyo Diwali, which is an amazing function happening in Benyo. We'll talk about that today as well. And of course, tonight is the big show in Brisbane, which is Abhijit Show, brought to you by Desi Rock. So, that's going to be another great concert tonight. You might be able to still secure some ticket because it is a big, huge venue. Well, right now, let's get into the news for today. And let's take a look at what's actually making news at this point in time. Well, let's get an update on that flood situation.
Let's go to Danny first. What are conditions like where you are?
Well, there's no rain around, which is great news for people around here, but in Shepparton. But as you might be able to see, the banks of the Goulburn River has broken its banks, and it's creeping up the levee bank. You can see here towards houses on my left, and as you mentioned, it's expected to peak at about on Tuesday at about 12 metres at record levels, close to that flood, around about that flood of 1974 that people remember well around here. Even though there's a couple of days away, there is that warning for people to prepare to evacuate. And Shepparton people are certainly getting busy this morning. You might be able to see as I spin around here. This group of residents have got a large dump of sand there, and they're starting to make sandbags to protect their properties in readiness for the next couple of days. So there's quite a few sites around Shepparton, probably 3 areas that at the moment have been preparing to evacuate. It's 50,000 people live in Shepparton, and a lot of them live along the Goulburn River. They also live along the Broken River, which runs into the Goulburn at Shepparton. So it's a difficult area, and people have got a lot of work over the next couple of days to get ready. But there's not a real sense of urgency here at the moment. They get some time to really watch this river rise and get ready. The situation's more immediate in Murchison, which is about half an hour south of Shepparton. There's an evacuation warning in place there. It has been in place since yesterday, but people have been warned that it's too late to leave this morning. If you haven't got out, then you won't be able to, and so they're telling people to get to as higher ground as you can at Murchison. And the Goulburn River is expected to peak there this afternoon. Further east of Shepparton at Wangaratta, another large rural centre, the Ovens River is in flood there, and there's an area in the Parfitt Road levee system which is under an evacuation order. Apparently emergency services crews are going around door knocking people and warning them about the flooding that's occurring there. So there's a couple of hotspots, Murchison and Wangaratta at the moment, but Shepparton will have its time in the next couple of days. There's talk that the Peter Ross Edwards Causeway, which links Shepparton to another major town, Mooroopna, may well be flooded if it reaches those levels in 1974. I think that's the last time that the causeway, the road between the two towns, has been flooded. And so people are keeping an eye on things at the moment and wondering whether we'll get to that on Tuesday.
Well, at least there's a little bit of a break in the weather there, Danny, and hopefully people can start to clean up. But I want to go now to Alex and take us through what's expected there today, Alex.
Yeah, so the Avoca River is currently at a moderate flood level of 7.36 metres, and it's expected to reach the major flood level of 7.5 later today. It's been rising pretty steadily across today, and at the moment I'm here at the Charlton Showgrounds, which was meant to be having the first agricultural show since the pandemic began, but late on Thursday night, due to the forecasts, that was cancelled. Now at that point the forecasts were that the river would reach 8 metres perhaps, but they had been revised down, and initially it was expected that it would reach major flood levels by 8 this morning, and that hasn't happened. So there hasn't been much urgency through town either. There is still an order to evacuate if you can, but we've seen people walking their dogs around town today. A lot of people relieved that the sandbags at their properties haven't yet needed to be used. So at this point while the messages are still to get out while you can, there's a sense of relief here at the moment. We've only really seen about 2 properties go under when yesterday the forecasts were that maybe 70% of the town would be affected and 40 to 50 properties could have some level of water around them. Now, the main point here is there still is a watch and act warning to move to higher ground if people can move to the higher part of Charlton, or if they can evacuate to the nearby relief centre at Witchyproof, a town not far from here. Yeah, at this point there's a lot of relief in town, as I said, and the rivers now are expected to peak at 7.8 metres around 8 p.m. tonight, according to the Bureau of Meteorology. Once it gets there, however, it could stay there for 3 to 5 days. So even though there's some good news at first here, Charlton is far from out of the woods yet.
Yeah, it certainly looks like it. All right, Alexander Darling there in Charlton. We also heard there from Danny Morgan, who's in Shepparton. Thank you to you both.
Let's continue with that report. Here is the warning from SES.
There are 64 warnings in place right now. Talk us through the most urgent areas.
So really at the moment, the focus for the emergency warnings is in the Lachlan River and the Forbes community, where we've got 7 evacuation orders in place. And then downstream at the Murrumbidgee at Wagga, where we've issued and prepared to evacuate for Narrandera and low-lying areas. We continue to...
Sorry, continue.
Yeah. We also continue to see major flood warnings across the Murray River with those significant rainfall events they had in Victoria yesterday and the day before, and that will be an area of focus going through the next week.
Have you had many call-outs overnight due to the wet weather?
So overnight we've had 213 requests for assistance and 7 flood rescues, so just encourage people not to drive, walk or enter floodwater.
Yeah, talk to us about the dangers of floodwaters around. It always looks calm at the moment. The weather looks, relatively calm as well. So talk to us about the dangers of floodwaters around.
So, floodwater, while it may not be raining, we've seen significant rainfall across Western New South Wales over the last few weeks and months. While it may look calm on the surface, underneath there the roads have been washed away. You can see debris flowing down the rivers, and given how wet it is, we often see rapid rises. Even if it's sunny today, the rivers will continue to move downstream, to really encourage residents to be aware of the conditions and monitor if they live near a watercourse.
And of course it goes without saying to not drive into floodwaters.
Definitely, to really encourage people. All the flood rescues that we saw overnight were people driving into floodwaters. Not only put yourself at risk, but also the agencies that go to rescue you. It's a really strong message. Please do not enter or drive through floodwaters.
Ben, we always hear about the significance of needing to have an emergency plan in place. What would that emergency plan look like? What would people have to think about?
So, people need to think about where they would go in the event if they're evacuated. So there is evacuation centres open when we issue evacuation order. But consider, would you save family and friends? What would you take for your property? So that's valuables, documents, your home emergency kit. We encourage everyone to have that home emergency kit available, not just for floods, but fires as well. And most importantly, it's know your flood risk and know what you'll do when flooding comes. Making a plan when it's flooding is too late. We really encourage people to make those plans now, particularly with the ongoing rainfall and wet season we've got over the coming months.
Some people may feel that they can't leave their property because they have animals or they have pets. What would you say to them?
So with the evacuation centres, they do make arrangements for pets, so please don't feel you need to stay in your property just because you have pets at home. There is options to ensure that we can evacuate those pets as well, given how many people own cats and dogs and birds across the inland. So please encourage them, don't delay for evacuation. There is facilities to house pets as well.
All right, Ben Pickup there from the Southern Zone. He is the Southern Zone Commander. Thank you very much for speaking with us today.
And thank you very much for that report. And as was mentioned that, you have to look after the pets as well, because they need care as well. Right now, we're looking at, Labour Party. We looked at that yesterday. So former PM Kevin Rudd says this will be the most significant party congress in 40 years. Here's that report by 7:30.
Kevin Rudd, welcome to the programme.
Good to be back, Sarah.
How significant is this moment if, as expected, she is appointed for a third term?
Well, having looked at party congresses of the Chinese Communist Party now since the early 80s, I'd say it's the most significant party congress in 40 years. And that's because Xi Jinping's breaking the two-term limit. He's become China's paramount leader. Collective leadership principles have been pushed to one side, and therefore the sacred writ of this single leader matters on all central questions of economic policy, foreign policy and security policy. So that's why it's important, not just in terms of personnel arrangements, but also the ideology which will be reflected in his work report to the Congress and giving us an insight into the future directions on the economy and China's view of the outside world.
Are we looking at him now then as a leader for life?
I believe so, and there's a reason for that. Breaking the two-term limit is significant in itself. Also, if you look at the surrounding emerging evidence of a new cult of personality of a type that we haven't really seen since Mao, suggests that we have Xi Jinping for the very long term. But also because he's been such a formidable Machiavellian politician in eliminating all forms of internal political opposition to him within the party. And, in the world of realpolitik, the brutal realpolitik of a Leninist party, if he were to step down, he could not guarantee that he wouldn't be taken out by those who he's alienated on the way through. So I think we should buckle up for the rest of the 20s and the 30s, because I think he's with us for the very long term.
Now, previous leaders had moved away from this concentration of power in one person, protecting China from the emergence of a second Mao. How did Xi get his colleagues to agree?
Well, he spent his first term between 2012 and 2017 conducting one of the biggest internal party purges that we've seen since Mao. Often not fully reported in the West, but wave after wave of taking out so-called anti-party cliques, but also an anti-corruption campaign and later a party rectification campaign, which has cut a swathe through the rest of the Communist Party ranks, producing effectively something of a reign of terror within the operation. So therefore, if there was significant opposition during his first term, and there was some, by the time we get to the beginning of his second term in 2017, most of that had fallen by the wayside. And so therefore, he's been in a position to assert these fundamental systemic changes that we've seen on the question of his paramount leadership as opposed to collective leadership.
What does this mean for the prospects for Taiwan?
Well, I think we're now on a timeline for Taiwan, and I don't say that idly, because when Xi Jinping uses the phrase, the great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation, becoming the region's and the world's preeminent power by 2049, he's also now on the record as saying that can't be achieved in the absence of reunification with Taiwan. That is new compared with his predecessors who had perfected the art of pushing the Taiwanese can down the road. What's my own assessment is that we're not looking at the prospect of China moving militarily against Taiwan in the 2020s, and the reason for that is because China at this stage is not sufficiently confident of its military capability that there would not be a risk that it would lose against the US, Taiwan and or its allies in such a conflict. I think Xi Jinping's preferred timetable is the 2030s, by which time he would still be in power. He's got good genes. His mother's still alive at the age of 96. He hopes to further open up a military gap against the United States and Taiwan over the next 7 years or so, and hopes to financially and economically insulate China against the risk of global sanctions against China of the type that we have seen applied to Russia because of its invasion of Ukraine.
This Congress does coincide with China's worsening economic situation, something that the younger generation of Chinese are not accustomed to. How much does the slowing of the Chinese economy cobble his power?
Well, Sarah, you're right. I've written for some time now that I believe the economy represents Xi Jinping's Achilles heel. And it's slowing for several sets of reasons. There's the overhang of demography. Countries getting older. The birth rate is now 1.16, the second lowest in Asia. Beginning to have a shrinking population, and for some years now a shrinking workforce. That's demography, but then there's this second factor, which is the overhang of ideology. And as he's moved the centre of gravity of Chinese economic policy in the last 5 years to the Marxist-Leninist left, then the Chinese private sector has begun to reduce its enthusiasm for continued fixed capital investment in the economy. Add to that zero COVID lockdowns, you have the economy barely bumping along at maybe 2 or 3% at the moment, and this may prove to be secular and structural for the long term rather than just temporary because of COVID. This is his Achilles heel, and he would need to execute a significant ideological U-turn or change in this 20th Party Congress in order to remove this ideological impediment to growth that he's imposed for the last 5 years.
Why do you think that the Chinese, through their ambassador here, have been making overtures towards a better relationship with Australia? Is it genuine, and does it come from Xi himself?
China's general strategy for diplomacy and foreign and security policy does come from numero uno. That's the way in which the system is structured these days in Beijing. It's not just random acts by ambassadors or let alone policy frolics by the Chinese Foreign Ministry. These are calibrated internally and at the centre for all countries, not just us, by the way. I think in Australia's case also, Sarah, it's been helpful that we've seen from Prime Minister Albanese, the Foreign Minister Penny Wong, and Defence Minister Richard Marles a predisposition to put the megaphone away and not to scream and shout at Beijing every second Tuesday morning in order to get something off their chest, a la Morrison and Dutton. That, I think, has helped in stabilisation.
A very interesting few days ahead in Beijing. Thank you very much indeed for sharing your expertise.
And, of course, he does have that expertise, very conversant in the language itself. Well, ladies and gentlemen, right now let's take a look at what else is making news. We've always been talking about the energy crisis. What would the future be like? The future for cars, electric cars, what sort of percentage are there now?
So take-up is growing, but it's still a small part of overall car sales, isn't it?
Yeah, look, the good news out of this report, Ros, is that we are seeing an increase in electric vehicle sales. It's heading in the right direction. But unfortunately, it's just not at the pace we need to see in order for all Australian households to get access to an electric vehicle and, importantly, for us to hit our emission reduction targets.
Right. So if the demand is there, then, Jake, why aren't car makers exporting their electric vehicles here to Australia?
Yeah, the number one policy setting that's missing in Australia is a fuel efficiency standard. So if you look at comparable right-hand drive markets like the UK, they're now sitting at about 20% of all new cars being electric vehicles. The key difference between the UK and Australia, they have a fuel efficiency standard and we don't. And without that policy, there isn't really that strong pull for car makers around the world to prioritise our market for these vehicles. And as a result, we're at the back of the queue.
The government, though, is seeking submissions for its national electric vehicle strategy, which is likely to result, it's said, in a fuel efficiency standard. So if Australia made it mandatory for car manufacturers to bring in a minimum number of green vehicles, what would sales numbers be then? What would be the uptake?
Yeah, I think the exciting thing is that we do have this opportunity through the National Electric Vehicle Strategy that the federal government is currently taking input on to introduce an ambitious fuel efficiency standard. And if we can get that in place in the near future, you know, in the next 12 to 18 months, even before that policy comes into effect, we'll see car manufacturers starting to shift supply and increase supply to our market. And quite quickly, I think, you know, in the next 5 to 6 years, it is feasible for Australia to catch up to some of those markets, but only if we act now to bring in place a fuel efficiency standard.
Well, the obstacles to electric vehicles sales, they've always been, haven't they? The number and accessibility of charging points, and also the distance cars can travel on a single charge. Have there been improvements on either or both of those points?
Yeah, so certainly when we look across the world at the current state of technology, now you're seeing the average electric vehicle having a driving range between 400 and 600 kilometres. So for many Australian households and also businesses, that's more than sufficient. Additionally, we are seeing charging infrastructure across the country continue to be built out. That's increased this year compared to last year. We still have some way to go, but with, again, the right policy settings in place, we can have a charging network that covers a significant part of the country and ensures that, you know, every 70 to 100 kilometres, we have a charging infrastructure facility available for when people do take those longer trips.
All right. What's happening on price?
So price has fallen. I mean, there are some challenges with the global supply chain right now, particularly, with the war in Ukraine and other economic pressures. There have been some issues around inflation leading to, I would say, a less aggressive reduction in vehicle prices. But importantly, in other markets that, again, have a fuel efficiency standard, they are seeing those more affordable electric vehicle models being delivered. And so there is still great opportunity for us through this policy setting to have affordable electric vehicles come into the country. And I would say, again, in the next 5 to 6 years, be in a situation where there are electric vehicles at the same cost as a petrol or diesel equivalent. But even more importantly, instead of having to pay, $2 per litre on fuel that we're wholly dependent on importing from overseas, with electric vehicles, you're paying the equivalent of 20 to 30 cents per litre using 100% Australian-made energy to power our transport system.
So there you go, 100% Australian-made energy. So we are going towards that the electric car market, and of course the recharging and the charging stations, and now that the cars can do 400 to 600 in a kilometers before needing recharging. That's amazing. Well, right now the big news today is the Abhijit show in Brisbane. Let's take a look at that. There's some glimpses from the past performances. So yes, and this will all be happening here tonight in Brisbane. So we'd like to invite you all, if you haven't got your tickets yet, so please get your tickets. And we'd like to see you all at this mega concert. Tonight is the night for Brisbane. And there is Manmohan with Abhijit Ji. Manmohan is the promoter. So as you can see, all other states have had sold out concerts. And yes, it is today. Today is the day. So today is when it will be happening. So we'll go down the memory lane of the 90s, those amazing numbers that he is going to be putting forward. So we'd like to see you all there. Well, right now let's take a look at what else is happening in Brisbane. So this is the Abhijit concert which is happening today. So, if you haven't got your tickets, you might be lucky enough to find some on the premiertickets.com. And it's a concert not to be missed. So that's happening tonight. And of course, Banyo Diwali, this is taking place today from 2 p.m. till 6 p.m. at 284 St. Vincent's Road in Banyo. The Banyo Beehive stand, and a perfect day for it today as well, because sometimes, the weather for an outdoor event could be challenging, but this is looking very, very good. So Reg and the team are all there setting up. It's all going to be a beautiful day. And Brisbane Indian Times, Australian Indian Radio and GlobeNet Realty proud sponsors of the event. And for Hindu Society of Queensland, the Diwali celebration is today from 3 p.m. If you are able to attend, please attend that as well. So, well, ladies and gentlemen, as I mentioned, it is going to be a very, very, very busy weekend. And there's so much happening again tomorrow as well. We have the seniors function and so many other functions that are taking place. But for now, it's a goodbye from us. It's wonderful having your company. We'll see you all back on Monday.